Welcome once again to the Radical Imagination. I'm your host, Jim Vrettos. I'm a sociologist who's taught at John Jay College of Criminal Justice and Yeshiva University here in New York City. Our guest today on the Radical Imagination is a Republican candidate for mayor of New York City, Curtis Sliwa. We welcome him and look forward to a serious, spirited, and down-to-earth dialogue on what it would mean for New Yorkers to have him as our mayor in the second most difficult political job in the country. Millions of us, literally, would be entrusting our lives to his leadership in these profoundly troubled and traumatic times. What kind of city would we be living in? How would he heal and bring us together with a radical love that would make the city more humane and livable for us all, particularly the most vulnerable and disenfranchised, which are most of us? Best known as the founder of the controversial Guardian Angels in 1979, a volunteer safety patrol and crime-fighting group he started at a time of soaring crime in the city, Curtis has also been a popular AM radio talk show host over the last 3 decades. He's never run for office, has no experience in government, and has never managed a significant budget. And he's given little chance of being elected in a city where there are roughly 7 times as many registered Democrats as there are Republicans. But he has huge name recognition, is perceived as a more authentic, natural candidate than the 2 previous Republican candidates for mayor, and has been a larger-than-life public figure in the city for decades. He's perceived as an outsider candidate with a flair for the theatrical, using populist conservative rhetoric as he walks the streets and subways of the city, campaigning in places like Orchard Beach in the Bronx, while his Democratic opponent is traipsing out to the Hamptons and Martha's Vineyard, soliciting millions from major mega donors. Is this truly a radical shift in Republican city politics away from the usual corporate government law enforcement type candidates? Or is it just a different political form that still ends up promoting those views and policies? So, on that note, welcome, Curtis. How are you?
Excellent introduction, because wow.
You like that? Wow? Because listen, and Happy New Year, Happy Labor Day, or we're taping this a day after Labor Day. You like that? Well, I've got a lot to say, a lot of questions. Actually, you've got a lot to say. I have some questions, and forgive me, some of them are a little long. That's the academic part of me, but bear with it. Others are a lot shorter. But what did you like about the introduction? What struck you?
Well, because you did recognize that even though I'm the Republican candidate, and also I'm running on the independent line, that I'm not your traditional Republican. My opponent in the Republican primary, Fernando Mateo, spent $2 million directing at Republicans' TV ads, radio ads, to say Curtis is not a Republican and he's a never Trumper. It's true. You didn't hear me arguing that. But if you're grassroots and you're out in the communities, a lot of times people will negate you because, okay, they don't feel that you're part of their party line, but they know that you've earned street cred. And in these blue-collar working class areas, these remaining Republican enclaves, I've established trust in 42 years, even though, look, they knew I didn't vote for Trump, although I didn't vote for Hillary. I didn't vote for President Joe Biden. I voted for independent candidates.
And you voted for yourself once, too, right?
That's right. The first time, 2016, it was such.
Why not?
And not only that, I took the picture of me voting for myself, which is so crazy. They say that's against the law.
Probably not. But listen, would you take an endorsement from Trump? Would you agree to have one? If he gave you an endorsement, would you accept it?
No. In fact, I don't want any endorsements. You see, endorsements in a general campaign basically come about because you've agreed to a particular policy, or you've agreed with the real estate or the big money interests to give them a certain amount of slack. And I've met with some of these people, and I've said oftentimes, no, 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 no. I've said, we got to learn to do more with less. You know, we're spending money we don't have. Everybody obviously feels that they are the priority in this city. And I've said, no, the people who are a priority are the emotionally disturbed and the homeless people. They are the priority because they're out in the streets because of us, because of our elected officials. And that has to be addressed. And they don't want to hear that. Nope, I'm telling you.
And you have a very poignant YouTube video of you in the subways, you know, trying to comfort a homeless person, obviously, that was really out of it and so on. I'm going to get to those questions because they're very important, very significant. I'm so glad you brought up. But I want to, as I told you before we started, my first question, in a sense, is honoring your father.
Yeah.
Which, and I'm sure your parents would be so thrilled and proud of you. And yet I want to bring this question to you as the first one.
Sure.
Your father was a merchant seaman and member of the old left-leaning National Maritime Union.
Yes.
He gave you a copy of Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, which I agree with you. As you said, let's see, put it up there, right? Okay, right. Rules for Radicals. He gave you that as a young man, which you described as one of the greatest books of all time. How is Alinsky, a self-professed man on the left, influenced your politics and community organizing, particularly when it comes to the needs and issues of what exactly you're talking about, the issues affecting unions, labor rights, and working people?
Well, my father was from Chicago, the south side of Chicago. Mm-hmm. And at the time, Saul Alinsky was a great organizer and fighting the Democratic machine, the entrenched daily Democratic machine, which went on for decades. And my father described how when they wouldn't pick up the garbage in certain neighborhoods, Saul Alinsky organized people to bring their garbage to City Hall and dump it on what is now called Daley Plaza. And I said, wow, that is so cool.
Yeah, yeah.
And then he started to describe other measures that one could use when the deck is stacked against you, like if you're at a meeting and all of a sudden your voice can't be heard or you're being stifled because the promoters of the meeting are trying to show that they're open-minded, but they're really not open-minded. You have individuals placed in the room and you distract and you disrupt and you end up pushing your agenda forward so that people can hear a second agenda. And you know, the amazing thing is, years after, because I applied Rules for Radicals to organizing the Guardian Angels, because remember, we were considered radical. I was arrested 76 times in the first 13 years and given wooden shampoos, concrete facials, and attitudinal readjustments by the police. So I know what it's like to be ostracized. But then, you know, as folks were railing against Saul Alinsky, particularly in the aftermath of Barack Obama's election as president. They said, oh, he was weaned on Saul Alinsky. He was a community organizer. Hey, the biggest community organizer I know is Curtis Sliwa. I've organized Guardian Angels in 13 countries, 130 cities. There are things in Rules for Radical that can apply to so many things. And a lot of people don't realize when Breitbart himself and O'Keefe of Project Veritas got arrested down in Louisiana for trying to tap the phone lines of the governor in Baton Rouge, they indicated how they had studied Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals.
But Curtis, I hear what you're saying. Yes, there are these rules going to be applied, but let me just also point this out.
Yes.
Alinsky begins this way. He had a vision too. And that's what we're talking about. What kind of vision are we going to have in the face of the enormous anger and frustration and energy that we are experiencing in the city and all around the world? Okay, so he says, Alinsky begins this way. What follows is for those who want to change the world from what it is to what they believe it should be. The Prince was written by Machiavelli. For the haves on how to hold power. Rules for Radicals is written for the have-nots on how to take it away. His rules derive from many successful campaigns where he helped poor people fighting power and privilege. So I think, doesn't that have to be really kept in mind here when we start talking about social movements, political rebellions, and so on. And who are we representing? What sort of vision we might have? And to get back to the question, again, what is your vision for workers, for the poor, for the disenfranchised? The self-professed man of the left here, Alinsky, who is fighting for their rights.
Yeah.
Are you trying to do the same?
Well, clearly, I don't accept each and every point, just like I don't accept each and every point of any manifesto I've read or any manuscript I've read or any ideology that I've studied. But I've cherry-picked things. I like the tone. I like the structure, because what it's really saying to people is, don't be dependent on the status quo to make change, because their job is to stay in power. So if we notice, our elected officials, they morph. Polls are out, and then all of a sudden they're morphing. You have to organize. You must organize. If you don't organize, if you try to do it independently and autonomously, you will fail in the process. It's us and we, not I and me. That's the whole basis of the guardian angels. If I had tried to go out there and do this on my own without the help of others who felt the same way I did, all I did was show them a way that they could make change. And as a result, they felt better about themselves, the community.
No, I hear you. I hear you, Kurt. I think that's much of your appeal, and I understand that, and I appreciate that. I respect it as well. But tell me, what separates you from, let's say, an AOC? Would you, I mean, give her some credit on this too, right? She's sort of attempting in her own way, grassroots organizing and so on, and disrupting the establishment and so on.
Look, I knew Crooked Joe Crowley.
Okay. All right.
I actually walked around his district as a joke with his face on a milk carton and asked people if they had ever seen this guy. They didn't even know who he was. He did no.
He never stood for election, right? He never stood for election.
He never faced a primary from the time he was an assembly person. And by the way, people need to know this. He was put in there by Congressman Manton. He was a pro-life Democrat. You would have thought, right? He would have had a pro-choice Democrat challenge him. Manton wouldn't permit it. He was the head of the corrupt Queen's Democratic machine. But he never was challenged. So he always just basically was reelected. And then AOC and her followers, they went out there and they busted their shoes. They went door to door. They were relentless. Right. They didn't steal that election, as some would say. They earned the election. Now, the problem I have with AOC is she says that she is a woman who represents people in the streets. She hasn't necessarily been seen in the street. I'll give you a simple example. Just yesterday in Woodside with the flooding, she appeared with the power brokers, de Blasio and Schumer.
I saw that clip, by the way. That's where you were in the bin there with all the garbage and stuff.
Yeah, the dumpster. And I took time to talk with people. AOC ignored talking to the people. The people really wanted to speak. And if you notice in a number of articles, they were very upset at mostly de Blasio, but AOC and Schumer for not taking the time to talk directly to them since they were queued up.
Right.
And see, that's the problem. The elected officials, they do a hit and miss. Now, AOC, when she was running, when she was still the bartender, because she had to earn her own money, she was very available to people on a regular basis. So I think she's veered away from that. I have differences ideologically with her about the police, about prisons and such. Yeah. But I admire her organizing and the organizing of all of those who followed in her footsteps. By the way, one of them, Caban, almost beat the mother of my two younger children, Melinda Katz, who became the Queen's DA. So I saw firsthand how well the DSA organized, how they put boots on the ground, how they went door to door, how they were relentless. Look, I admire that because that's what I do. I've been doing that for 42 years in my life.
It's a small world. We had her scheduled, Caban scheduled for on this show on the Sunday before the primary. Couldn't make it. So I don't know. She might have made it. Maybe she would have won. But anyway, that's who the heck knows? It's a weird world. But listen, what I want to ask you, let's get concrete here. You want to end property tax waivers for large nonprofits like Columbia University and Madison Square Garden. Where do you stand on the 421A waiver? that's existed since the 70s for luxury real estate developers that Cuomo reinstated in 2018. And that's $1.4 billion a year in lost revenue for the city. Where do you
Well, let's sort of bifurcate it. First, you have Madison Square Garden, Columbia University, and NYU who pay no property taxes. And I'm not the only person who talked about that in the campaign. Andrew Yang also focused on that. So you say to yourself, wait a second, here's Columbia University up in Morningside Heights buying up massive amounts of private property up there, taking it off the property tax rolls. Likewise, NYU down in the Village. Sometimes it looks like the Village has become NYU town.
Yeah.
You know, they just buy up everything. They pay no property tax. And I'm saying, wait a second. Columbia University sits on an endowment of $11 billion, NYU $4 billion, and Jimmy Dolan pays no property taxes for MSG dating back to the 80s when not him, but the previous owners threatened to go to the Meadowlands. Yeah, how did that work out for the Nets? So if you want to threaten to go to the Meadowlands, go ahead, knock yourself out, Jimmy Dolan. But you got to pay your fair share of property taxes. The difference I have than Yang had is that I would dedicate it specifically to the hiring of 3,000 additional cops, vetting them out, training them at college point, because we need the cops. We're down to about 34,500. And this would follow on the heels of what was done by David Dinkins and then Peter Vallone Sr., who was the Speaker of the City Council, who came up with Safe City, Safe Streets to hire more police officers at dedicated tax. This would be a dedicated property tax for that purpose.
But what about the luxury real estate taxes for the under this waiver here? Is that fair?
You mean supposedly to provide affordable housing?
421A
right.
waiver. All right. So they're the luxury real estate developers that you've spoken against and say should be running.
No, I know that my opponent, Eric Adams, is being wine-dined and pocket-lined by them. But let's give you an example.
Okay.
We have all this abandoned commercial space, millions of square feet of abandoned commercial space. You go into the Hudson Yards, you think you're in the catacombs. You know, what are we going to do with all this abandoned space? Turn it into more storage facilities like we did the old factories? You know, there's storage facilities in every neighborhood for people like me who have I'm a clutterer. So we always like put our clutter in storage. I say before you start thinking of Sunset Park and Sunnyside Yards and developing, how about repurposing all the empty commercial space that we already have? You're not going to get commercial uses for it. You're going to have to repurpose it. And I would suggest twofold. We've just seen the problem of people living in illegal basements, not fully up to spec as some basements are for dwelling. Why wouldn't we repurpose some of that empty commercial space and over time move these people who obviously are desperate? And landlords who obviously turned their eye the other way, did not do the appropriate improvements to their property to make it a legal dwelling, and repurpose close to what is estimated 100,000 people who live in illegal basement developments into some of this commercial space that we would repurpose. I think that's a priority.
Okay.
Not building new high-rises, condos, you know, attached to commercial space
that are half empty and are being rented out and being bought by people, you know, international jet setters all over the world.
Right. Yeah, it's an investment for them, and especially from corrupt countries. Instead of buying gold bullion and putting it into the Federal Reserve down in Wall Street, I've been down there. I've seen their gold bricks. You know, they invested in condos and they flip them. So I'm of the opinion to say, again, we got to do more with less. We got all of this available space. Let's repurpose it for the needs of the people. Oh, my God, you say that? Republicans say that? Oh, and it's Eric Adams who's saying it. Yeah, isn't it?
Yeah, Eric. Now, I have a couple other questions
yes.
that are related to that.
Yes.
35 million Americans, millions of New Yorkers are losing unemployment income.
Yes.
Supreme Court has chosen to side with landlords over the millions of renters on the edge of eviction. How, as mayor, would you respond?
All right, well, let's look at it in three ways. You know, there are a lot of people who will not go back to work because they're getting unemployment. They acknowledge that. They're telling their employees, hey, I'm just going to run it out, and hopefully I'll have that job available to me. And it's been very difficult for employers trying to get back on track after being crushed by the lockdown and the pandemic to actually get a labor force, even though they're sweetening them up, offering them bonuses, paying them well above the minimum wage. It's very difficult. Now, are some in need of it? I'm sure some are, but there are a lot of people who are just sort of riding the tide and now realize they have to get back into the job market. There's 10% unemployment in New York City, about 5% in the state. It's a lot better in other parts of the country. So, yeah, people got to get back to work. Now, in terms of the rent moratorium, you know, everybody thinks of the complete opposites. The guys and the gals who can't pay their rent, of which there are quite a few.
700, 800,000, I believe.
Right. And then the huge developers who can absorb those losses. And then you got your typical mom and pop owners, you know, maybe they got 3 or 4 apartments, or maybe it's, a 2-family home. And they're getting crushed because they're having to continue to pay 6% increase in property tax. They got to put improvements into the property. That's about 4%. We saw that Cuomo screwed them over big time because we got an allotment of money from the federal government with the stimulus that was supposed to directly go to the landlords to be able to offset their losses when tenants were not able to pay.
And 90% of the money did not go there. Did not get to them yet. Yeah,
it didn't. And if you remember initially, when unemployment was coming from the federal government to add to the additional unemployment you were getting from the state, remember how poorly New York State was able to allocate it, because again, it's so arcane.
Yeah,
so I would have to say, hey, you almost got to look at this point by point. I know people who are gaming the system and scamming the system. I know others that are desperately in need, and I know a lot of small landlords who are being crushed. Now, if the property becomes distressed, which is quite possible in many of these smaller properties, then the landlords will abandon the properties. We remember what happened in the 70s. Now, they'll leave to Del Rey and Boca Raton, the Sunshine State, and you won't be able to touch them. Right. We can't allow these properties to go into distress. I don't want the city and the state being the landlords, because look at NYCHA, perfect example. What a disaster.
All right, well, we'll get back to that in just a bit too. But let me segue into the concerns of small business owners. There's presently a petition, I don't know if you've seen it, circulating by the Coalition to Save Beauty Salons and Barbershops in the Uptown Immigrant Family-Owned Small Businesses. Now, this petition is addressed to Councilman Rodriguez and your opponent, Eric Adams, calls for support of the Job Survivals Act, which would give every small business the right to renew long-term 10-year leases, protection from rent gouging, and equal rights to negotiate for lease terms. What would be your position on the Job Survivals Act and other ways to save small businesses in the city?
Well, I address it in a different way. I mean, asking for a 10-year lease guaranteed in what we don't know is going to be the return of commercial property, because I view oftentimes letting capitalism play. We have this huge supply and very little demand of commercial space. And I noticed that a lot of individuals are playing let's make a deal like Monty Hall. So you got the mortgage holders, you got the realtors, you got the landlords, you got the third parties, you got the lessees and the renters themselves. And sometimes they're making deals now because the renters and the lessees can't pay what they had initially agreed on. And they're accepting in lieu of payment a percentage of the profit. Now that came about the good old-fashioned supply and demand capitalism, Milton Friedman, that kind of concept. And I know a lot of
written down in some sort of lease, or this can change monthly, literally.
Right, because let's face it.
Well, what kind of security? What is it for either side? What kind of chaos is that?
Well, I would look at it because I have to be very honest. I'm not up on every aspect of what they're asking of Eric Adams and also their local official of the key points. But I would say this is that there should be a right to business. I have found that amongst the immigrant community, legal and undocumented, they are the most industrious. They are the ones that can make a business out of nothing. They can make a business out of a closet. If you go up into Washington Heights, you don't see any empty space. You go into Corona, you go into Jackson Heights, you go into Elmhurst. There's almost no empty space. They'll basically repurpose a commercial storefront and then turn it into 3 separate small businesses. They're doing that on their own already, in league with landlords and whoever is the owner or operator or the absentee landlord of the property or the person who is supervising the property in lieu of the landlord. I think we have to allow for a lot more of that.
Right. So your position is the less government, the better in terms of any sort of financial aid here or support for people in economic or housing distress?
No. I would say let the capital forces work, supply and demand. And then if we see that people are being squeezed out, this right to business that I talk about, getting first-time business owners, give them an opportunity so that they get an easy pass. They get by all these fees and fines and permits and licenses that tie you up in a knot. Give them the microloans, get them a mentor, because first-time men and women getting into business, it's very difficult, and guide them along the way. We want them to be a success. Now, are my sons going to want to open up a business? The reality, I have 3 sons. No, I don't think they're going in that direction. More than likely, a lot of the immigrants who come here have that as a dream. That's one of the goals that they have in being here in America. And I think we got to give them that opportunity. We have to allow capital forces to play it first. And then if that's not working, then you may have to revert to government getting involved. But the problem is everybody always wants government involved. They want government taking care of.
Curtis, haven't, as a man of the people, haven't we seen over the last 40 years this enormous increase in disparity of income? And it's been well documented. Well, we'll get into criminal justice again in just a few minutes, but rates of crime and violence, especially violence, are directly related to economic inequalities. And yet those inequalities continue to grow, even in the midst of the virus here. So when we let the market run untrampled, I think what you see is the multi-billionaires and really running the show, and the disparity of wealth increases. I just want to put this on you as well, because I just want to ask you this in terms of the multi-billionaires here. You were in the Hamptons. I understand. Adams was in the Hamptons, and the Post has an article, I guess, yesterday. See who's singing to John Costamatos at Southampton Bash. Billionaire supermarket mogul John Costamatos marked his birthday with a weekend Hamptons Bash featuring comic Joe Piscopo, crooning "That's Life." Well, at least I don't know. You didn't do it, right? You weren't crooning, but you had a speech by Rudy Giuliani and you. And it's also in the article saying that your pitch came after you recently ripped Adams for getting wined and dined in the Hamptons, and Costamatos himself hosted a fundraiser for Adams in the Hamptons this past summer. And the last point on this, and again, I'm Greek on my father's side, so I understand this. Hefty portions of Greek food, including moussaka and pastisio, were served at the birthday bash to honor the Nisros-born Costamatos heritage. Now, this is what gets to me. Some 10,000 plates were also broken to get rid of quote-unquote frustration. Man, that's a lot of frustration. 10,000 plates. How many did you break?
No, I didn't break any.
How could that possibly? What do they have? Some set up a machine gun or something and just put the? No,
well, let's put this. Let's put this
in perspective. Okay, so what's going on?
Context. I have not held fundraisers in the Hamptons. Previously, when in the Republican primary, when I initially started, there was one fundraiser for me out there. None since. This was a birthday celebration. Nobody was making donations to me. John Katzimatidis and his wife, Margot, who are the owners of Red Apple Media, were my employers at WABC. They allowed me to leave my contract so I could run for mayor. They didn't have to do that. I was the #1 moneymaker at WABC in terms of commercial revenue. So all I was doing was going to their birthday celebration. There were Democrats there. There were Republicans. There was no donations. And I was simply there to pay my respects at his birthday and to Margot, and then I left.
So you're not beholden to the billionaire mogul.
No, look, he's my friend. He certainly has given me advice. But as you can see, his friends in the various industries that he has his investments in are not supporting my candidacy. Right. They're supporting Eric Adams. So I think that the proof is in who are the heavy hitters supporting in New York City. And my name does not resonate with them at all.
Let me just mention, I actually live a couple blocks from, I think it was the first Red Apple grocery store that ever got started. I think it was on 96th and Broadway. And then, you know, we had Gristedes on. So this was back in the 70s, right? So I used to frequent it. So I guess I helped John toward his first billion anyway.
Well, the thing that has drawn us to one another, both he and Margot, is their love of animals. As you know,
I want to get into that.
Yeah. They've been very supportive of our efforts to rescue animals and to fight for no-kill shelters.
Are you a vegetarian?
No, although I'm working my way in that degree for the simple reason that I have chronic Crohn's disease and so many stomach ailments that I can't eat meat. The last vestiges is now fish. My wife is almost to the point of being a vegan. So she's slowly but surely bringing me in that direction. I know my opponent is a vegan for all the right reasons. No, I'm not a vegetarian or a vegan yet.
But moving toward it, and you're eating the salmon and getting your omega-3s and really sincerely good luck with all of that, and be healthy. Yeah, well, let me turn to, and again, we're going to talk more about criminal justice on the podcast with Manny Gomez. But it happens that I'm doing a show tomorrow with the author of, I don't know if you've heard of the book. It's quite famous, Dog Whistle Politics. I wonder if you would react to this question. Ian Lopez's book, Dog Whistle Politics, points out that the Republican Party today, in its voters and in its elected officials, is almost all white. The rise of a racially identified GOP is centered on the strategic decision to use racism to become the white man's party. Politicians of both parties have mastered the use of dog whistles. So we're getting back to the pets here, which are veiled racial appeals to agitate white voters, to turn Americans against each other, while generating support for policies that in fact favor society's wealthiest. Well, when you think about that analysis, is this the way to run a political strategy in New York?
Well, as you can see, that's not the political strategy in New York. The candidate that was running against me, who was a Trump supporter, who had been embracing the Trump legacy, lost to me by a sizable margin, 70 to 30%. So the voters obviously chose me more as a populist than as a Republican. I think there are a lot of Republicans out there who don't necessarily see me as a true Republican. Look, the truth of the matter is I can go into neighborhoods where the only Republican they've ever seen is Abraham Lincoln on a $5 bill and be received and be heard. Doesn't mean everybody's going to agree with me, but I have that street cred. I have that respect. And so there are a lot of Democrats who look at me and they say, well, you're not what we thought you would be. And there are a lot of Republicans who look at me and you're not what we thought we would be, because my roots are as an independent. I was the chairman of the New York State Reform Party for 3 years. And then because Andrew Cuomo decided to wipe out third parties in his vengeance against the Working Families Party, only strengthening them, there are now only 2 independent parties left. That's Working Families Party and the Conservative Party. The rest of us, Libertarians, Green Party, Independence Party, Reform Party, gone because he raised the threshold. And that was part of the legacy of Andrew Cuomo, is that he would try to destroy all those that would not necessarily serve his needs. So I very much had an independent strain most of my life. I was registered as a McGovern Democrat, my first registration. Went to Washington for Nixon's inauguration as part of the anti-war movement. There was 1 million strong there. And I come from a family that was such strong Democrats, my father Chester and Francesca. When you walked into their bedroom, they had 4 figures on the wall. 1, Jesus Christ. 2, Pope John. 3, John Kennedy. 4, Barack Obama. I even said to my dad, I said, Dad, you're from Illinois. You told me all about Lincoln when I was a boy. He goes, yeah, well, I'm not putting Abraham Lincoln up on the wall. If I were only running as a Republican, and let's think that they were still alive, they would not vote for me. They never voted for a Republican in life, includes Ronald Reagan and Giuliani. But because I'm also on the independent line, I'm sure my parents would have voted for me on the independent.
And would they have a picture of FDR up there?
Yeah, they didn't have one of FDR, but I tell you a funny story. My grandfather, Fidel Bianchino, who came from Bari, couldn't read, couldn't write, went for his citizenship test before the federal judge. They asked him 10 questions. He answered every one of them Roosevelt. Roosevelt. He had no idea what the questions were. And the judge said, you're a citizen, Fidel Bianchino.
All right.
Sorry.
There you go. And you're here as a result of that, too. So
exactly.
And my people are, too. And now let's get back to the animals. And let's just really get very basic here. You have 16 cats. I love animals as well. My whole life I've had animals, dogs, cats, and so on. You've taken many in. You who needed shelter, who needed care, and your wife has helped you with this. And you're being a role model here of what it means to nurture and to care for life in a sense. Why can we not extend that to our discussion of human beings and not focus on the punishment, the retribution, the revenge angle? We know, I've had the psychiatrist James Gilligan and Bandy Lee, another psychiatrist, who have done work I'm working with Tom Hayden in the prisons, Curtis, showing that the recidivism rate goes down to 0. There's only one thing that does it. It's getting a college degree while they're in prison. We know that. I taught at prison. I mean, you've talked about also mental health care. I mean, people need, would you be against, for example, having a mental health worker along with you down in the subways there or with the transit police? That's what partly the funding the police is about. Can't we also talk about a humaneness that you absolutely are showing to animals? Can't we extend that to very traumatized and troubled people? This country is being torn apart by that.
Oh, there's no doubt. And if you notice, I have synergy. A society that does not treat its animals well will not treat its other humans well, and in fact has ostracized the emotionally disturbed and the homeless. I see the pattern there. Number one, when you look at the situation that you described in the prisons, I've been locked up 76 times. I've been in cells with men who could not read, could not write, could not communicate themselves with each other. They communicated thoracically, physically, because they were not able to understand necessarily what was being said. They couldn't read, they couldn't write. There was a tremendous degree of frustration. So I'm all for giving education, especially you're locked up. You got a captive audience. These guys are looking for things to do. The women are looking for things to do. And there is some schooling, but certainly not enough. They need a lot of vocational training and not just making license plates, so that when it is their time to go back into society, they have a skill that is in demand, so that a potential employment may overlook the fact that they were incarcerated, because let's face it, we're giving visas for workers who have particular negotiable skills that a lot of Americans don't have. So, yeah.
But Curtis, how does that jibe with your tough posturing on tough on crime? What does that mean? Bringing back more stop and frisk. Does that mean more incarceration? What do you mean by that? What are you talking about? How does that just jive with what you just said? And are the jobs actually going to be there? The skills.
As an example,
yeah, go ahead.
As an example, first off, if you look at the candidates, I'm the only candidate who's been shot 5 times and survived. I don't carry a weapon. I don't wear a bulletproof vest. Eric Adams brags about the fact that he carries a gun now that he's a retired police officer. I think that is the worst possible example you can give to young men whose levels of testosterone are crashing through their cranium because they think carrying a loaded 9mm is a signal of manhood. If anything, it's the absolute reverse. I keep telling young men and other young women who also are following that course that it's what you have between both ears that is the most important, that determines what you're able to, by thinking for yourself, making your own choices, not being ruled by a loaded weapon and whether it will be used. But temporarily, with the gang wars that are raging in the streets of New York City, you have to have a measure of stop, question, and frisk when there are known gangbangers who are openly firing weapons defiantly and having these major shootouts against one another. Give an example. A Haitian woman, 54 years old, on St. John's Place on Rogers Avenue, coming home after 12 hours as a home care attendant, gets shot twice in the chest. Competing gangs. This is the fourth murder as a result of their competing gang wars. No elected officials showed up. Nobody came to comfort the family. They wouldn't even put out candles and flowers and a memorial in honor of this woman because they were afraid of gang retaliation. You got to go into an area like that and get the guns off the street first. And then you could start applying some of the other social programs.
But because as you're well aware,
yeah,
abused people. I mean, Gilligan in his work found over and over again, he dealt with the most violent of people in the prisons in Massachusetts, where he was head of the Department of Mental Hygiene. Almost every single one had been severely physically, emotionally, psychologically abused themselves. So that's the reality. So yes, get them off the streets, but not punish, right? Restrain and offer them what they're not getting in that they never did have, the capacity to love, to have empathy, and to have in a way a conscience. So I mean, I know these are complicated issues and so on, and that's what we need from our political leadership.
I'll give an example, right?
Okay.
There's a major movement to stop solitary confinement as a disciplinary procedure used in a prison.
Right.
Yet, if you go into many of these inner city neighborhoods where gang members are having these shootouts, elderly people are in a form of solitary confinement because they can't leave their apartments. They're so terrified. So you have to find a balance. I'm not closed-minded to many of these concepts of how to get men, especially, and some women back on track, especially when you have the captive audience. I believe that because you have them most often away from the neighborhoods they grew up in, and you have them being mentored, and you have them being exposed to skills, whether it's academic skills. For some of them, they may not be able to absorb the academic skills, so it's the vocational skills. It's like Job Corps,
right,
that you're giving them while they're incarcerated, and you're giving them other therapies and methods of sort of determining who they are and what they are, and that they are of self-worth and they are a somebody, because many of them, they have horrible self-esteem. Look, I grew up with the infamous Testa brothers and Anthony Centaur. They are probably themselves responsible for 54 murders in having Khashoggi, their victims, as members of the Lucchese's and Gambino crime family. Why did I go in one direction and they go in a different direction?
Why?
Well, we should be researching this.
Well, you research it your life. What turned you in the direction?
Well, it's clear. It's my parents who are my role models. I didn't know that much about their parents. because I didn't have access to them. I only saw them on the periphery. But I also saw the other gavones from organized crime who got involved, who flirted with them with money, you know, steal cars, not for a joyride, but bring it to a chop shop, get money, and then cocaine. Cocaine just turned them into madmen, in which they just were constantly wondering who their enemies were. And then these were guys I never thought would kill anybody. They ended up killing over 50 people and then doing a Khashoggi on them, slicing them, and burying them in landfills. You say to yourself, how could that have happened? I grew up with them. I taught them how to play stickball. We played touch football in the streets. We went into the lots. We shot rats. I mean, you say
so what was so different about their parents and yours? What was
well, that's why we need to study it. Same while you have pedophiles. Nobody wants to talk about that. How come we're not studying them? Sexual assaulters. Why aren't we studying them? They are in diagnostic clinics, specialized prisons in some instances. Why aren't we trying to figure out why this is taking place instead of taking the code of omerta? I'm very open to that because I recognize that there is a path here that is replicating itself. We see that in the abuse cycle. Father abuses mother. Son swears he's not going to be an abuser. And then all of a sudden he becomes an abuser. And sometimes he doesn't even understand why.
Or not. You're right. There's a lot we don't know about human behavior. Let me ask you, now that marijuana is legal in the city, what do you make of that? Is that something you support? Do you think it's some sort of gateway drug? Or what about the possibility of other drugs being legalized?
No,
so it's drug war on drugs.
Yeah, it's certainly not a gateway drug. All you got to do is walk in the streets. People are vaping it everywhere. The smell is in the air. The reality is that government needs to be profiting from this, not gangs, not organized crime as it is, which leads to a lot of the violence. The problem is in states where you have had the legalization of recreational use of marijuana, they tax it at such a high level that it allows for the black market to exist and to actually, in some instances, prosper because as entrepreneurs, their gradations, their buds, the product they're selling has to improve. They're not charging you a tax. They're offering home delivery like the old Pope of Greenwich Village.
Yeah.
So they're competing with the state licensed stores. So I would say if you're going to tax it at the normal tax rate. That you have sales tax, 8.5%. Don't exceed that because your intention is to legalize it, make it readily available to those who can get it, if they're adults. But don't create such an enormous tax that it allows for the black market to persist. There's no way you're going to stop this. I've used medical marijuana as the alternative. I was on fentanyl and oxycodones for 3.5 years. Because of colitis, ileitis, chronic Crohn's disease, and I had been shot 5 times with hollow point bullets.
Right.
I was a hot mess. And I got to tell you, the only thing that allowed me to stop projectile vomiting, allowed me to actually absorb nutrients that I was just eliminating was the medical marijuana.
Medical marijuana. And the love and kindness of your cats.
Yep.
That took also, we have... Gosh, we've only got a couple minutes, and I got so many questions. Well, we're going to do this. We're going to do more, especially on criminal justice with Manny. But let me try to squeeze this question in. What's your position on a truly independent agency to investigate corruption in all venues of the criminal justice system, the police, Department of Corrections, court system, prosecutors, etc., in New York City? This is a part of the bill that Manny has introduced, the Department of Civilian Justice and Accountability Act. What about that? There's a lot of stuff getting in the way. The criminal justice system gets away with a lot of corruption here. Are you for some sort of way of investigating that corruption that would be independent? Truly.
Well, there are many agencies that are dedicated to investigating corruption, probably more than I have on both hands to count. From U.S. attorneys.
Does it make much difference? Is it? Do they really get down to it?
Well, I ask you
themselves.
I ask you this simple thing: how come there's no investigation of Thrive? an agency created by the mayor and his wife that has spent $1.25 billion for mental health, and I've seen no results. That is the most common question I get asked by Democrats, Republicans, independents, radicals, reactionaries. Okay. Where did that money go? No.
Fair enough. Go ahead. I understand. I agree with that. Let's investigate, have an independent investigation, and let's explore more of your ideas here.
Well, I would tell you this: Department of Investigation, which should be conducting these, should not be an appointed position of the mayor. As mayor, I should have nothing to do with that. They should be independent and autonomous, and the first ones they should investigate is the mayor.
Okay. And true to Saul Alinsky, if you become mayor, I guess you would also agree with that we should keep investigating you as well.
Yes. Yeah.
All right.
The press should not be my friend. They should keep my feet and my hands to the fire. That's their job.
Well,
force responsibility out of me and every other appointed and elected official, because too often they're friends.
Well, we're not friends, although I've enjoyed this dialogue with you enormously, Curtis. I think you've enlightened our audience. I really want to thank you very, very much for coming on The Radical Imagination. We are over time, so we will see you again. Good luck. Godspeed. Take care of yourselves. Take care of your cats, your wife. Have a great day. And we'll see you again very, very soon. Thank you.
I was ready to talk with you another 10 hours.
I know, but we're overtime. What can I tell you? You know,
overtime.
I'm out. Our Brooklyn backgrounds. This New York talk. God bless. Take care. All the best.
Thank you.
Thank you so very, very much, all of you, for listening to us on this program where we dialogue with Curtis Sliwa, the Republican candidate for New York City mayor. This is Jim Vrettos. We'll see you again next week on The Radical Imagination.